If you ever get a message from me that says I need you now, please do not come looking for me, Ava Brooks had once joked to her best friend. Because if I send something like that, it means I have completely lost my mind. The joke felt harmless back then. She never imagined those exact words would come back to change her life forever. Ava spent most of her days cleaning rooms inside Dominic Russo's sprawling estate on the edge of the city. To the outside world, Dominic was a powerful businessman whose name carried influence everywhere. To Ava, he was simply the man who always thanked her for her work, remembered her birthday, and asked whether she had eaten lunch. For 3 years she had worked quietly around him, carefully hiding feelings she knew could never belong in her world. A maid and a man like Dominic existed on opposite sides of a line nobody crossed. At least that was what she kept telling herself. On a chilly Friday evening, one of her old friends convinced her to attend a small birthday gathering downtown. Ava almost declined. She rarely went anywhere after work. Most nights were spent inside her modest apartment, helping her young daughter with homework and preparing for the next day. But her friend insisted, promising a quiet evening and familiar faces. For the first time in months, Ava agreed. Hours later, laughter filled the restaurant. Music played softly in the background. Ava found herself relaxing in a way she had not felt for years. She accepted a drink, then another. She was not a heavy drinker. By the time the celebration ended, her thoughts felt lighter and her emotions strangely exposed. Back home, the city streets were quiet. Ava sat on the edge of her couch while her daughter slept upstairs. Her phone rested in her hand. Without fully thinking, she opened her messages. Dominic's name appeared near the top. Earlier that day he had sent a simple text asking whether everything was going well. Ava stared at the screen for several seconds. Emotions she had buried for years rose unexpectedly to the surface. Loneliness. Exhaustion. Gratitude. Affection. Fear. Her fingers moved before her judgment could stop them. 3 words appeared on the screen. I need you now. The message was sent. Instantly, her eyes widened. Her heart dropped. No, 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 she whispered. She tried to delete it, but it was too late. Dominic had already received it. Panic flooded her chest. She typed an apology, erased it, typed another, erased that too. What explanation could possibly make sense? She finally tossed the phone onto the cushion beside her and covered her face with both hands. Maybe he would assume it was a mistake. Maybe he would ignore it. Maybe everything would be fine tomorrow. Then her phone vibrated. One new message. Dominic, are you okay? Ava stared at the screen but could not answer. 2 minutes later another message arrived. Ava? Still she remained frozen. 7 minutes passed. Then came a sudden knock at the front door. Ava's breath caught in her throat. Another knock followed. Firm. Immediate. Familiar. She slowly stood and walked toward the entrance. Through the small window beside the door, she saw a tall figure standing beneath the porch light. Dominic Russo had come himself. And as Ava reached for the handle, she noticed something upstairs she had not expected. A small light had turned on in her daughter's room, and tiny footsteps were moving across the floor. Ava slowly opened the door, and Dominic immediately studied her face with concern. He was still wearing the dark coat he had thrown on in a hurry, and his hair looked slightly out of place, as though he had left home the moment he received her message. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Ava felt heat rush into her cheeks. I am so sorry, she said. I should never have sent that. I was at a party. I had too much to drink. It was a mistake. Dominic did not look convinced. His eyes moved past her shoulder into the apartment. Ava, I asked if you were all right. Before she could answer, small footsteps came down the staircase. A little girl wearing pink pajamas appeared at the top landing and rubbed sleep from her eyes. Dominic froze. Ava froze too. The child looked no older than 7. She blinked at the stranger standing in the doorway before her face suddenly brightened. "Mom?" she asked softly. "Who is that?" Dominic turned toward Ava. During 3 years of working together, she had never once mentioned having a child. Not once. Ava's heart pounded. She had worked very hard to keep her personal life separate from her job. Most people at the estate knew almost nothing about her beyond the fact that she was dependable and hardworking. She had wanted it that way. "Sweetheart, go back upstairs," Ava said gently. "Everything is fine." The little girl looked at Dominic again. "Is he your friend?" she asked. Dominic offered a polite smile. "I hope so." The child smiled back before disappearing upstairs. Silence settled over the apartment. Ava finally stepped aside and allowed Dominic to enter. He closed the door behind him. Neither of them spoke for several moments. "You have a daughter," he said. It was not an accusation. It sounded more like surprise. Ava nodded. "Her name is Lily." Dominic glanced toward the staircase. "Why did you never tell me?" Ava folded her arms tightly. "Because my life is complicated." Dominic waited. Ava had learned long ago that he possessed an unusual patience. He never rushed people when they were struggling to speak. Eventually she sat down on the couch. "Lily is not the reason I sent that message," she admitted. "Then what is?" Dominic asked. Ava stared at the floor. Earlier that evening she had received a phone call she had not expected. A voice from a chapter of her life she had spent years trying to forget. The call had left her shaken long before the drinks ever arrived. "Someone contacted me tonight," she said quietly. "Someone from my past." Dominic's expression sharpened. "Someone dangerous?" "Not dangerous," Ava replied. "At least I do not think so. But someone I hoped never to hear from again." Dominic sat across from her. "What did they want?" Ava swallowed hard. The answer felt impossible to say aloud. Because the truth was that the call was connected to Lily. Connected to a secret she had protected for 7 years. A secret capable of changing everything Dominic thought he knew about her. Then her phone vibrated on the coffee table. A new message appeared on the screen. Ava looked down and immediately felt the blood drain from her face. The sender was the same person who had called earlier. This time there was only one sentence. "We need to talk about the child." For several seconds Ava could not take her eyes off the message. Dominic noticed the change in her expression immediately. "Who sent that?" he asked. Ava locked the screen and placed the phone face down on the coffee table. "Someone I used to know." Dominic leaned back slightly, giving her room to breathe. "Someone connected to Lily?" Ava looked up, surprised by how quickly he had reached the correct conclusion. She nodded once. The apartment felt smaller than usual. Outside, a light rain had begun tapping against the windows. Upstairs, everything was quiet again. Lily had returned to sleep, unaware that a single text message had reopened a chapter of Ava's life she had spent years trying to bury. "You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to share," Dominic said. "But whatever frightened you enough to send that message is not something you should face alone." Ava laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "You make it sound simple." Usually the truth is simpler than the fear surrounding it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood and walked toward a small cabinet beside the bookshelf. After opening a drawer, she removed an old photograph. The edges were worn from years of handling. She hesitated before handing it to him. Dominic studied the picture. A much younger Ava stood near a lakeside dock. Beside her was an older man dressed in an expensive suit. Between them sat a baby wrapped in a blanket. Dominic looked back at her. "Who are they?" Ava crossed her arms. "The baby is Lily." Dominic nodded slowly. "And the man?" Ava stared at the photograph. "His name is Charles Whitmore." Even Dominic recognized the name. Charles Whitmore owned several companies throughout the state and appeared regularly in financial magazines. His reputation was polished, respectable, and carefully maintained. "What is his connection to you?" Dominic asked. Ava released a long breath. 7 years ago, I worked for a charitable foundation in Ohio. That was where I met him. Dominic waited. He helped fund community programs, Ava continued. Everyone admired him. People trusted him. Her voice grew quieter. Including me. Dominic noticed she was choosing her words carefully, avoiding details she clearly was not ready to reveal. What happened? Ava looked toward the staircase. One day a situation occurred that changed several lives. After that, I left everything behind. I moved away. I changed jobs. I stopped speaking to everyone connected to that period of my life. Dominic glanced at the photograph again. And now he is contacting you? Not directly. Ava picked up her phone and reopened the latest message. His attorney contacted me first. Then this message arrived. Dominic frowned. What do they want? Ava shook her head. I do not know yet. The answer was only partly true. Deep down, she suspected exactly why they had returned after 7 years of silence. That possibility had haunted her since the first phone call earlier that evening. Suddenly another notification appeared. This time it was an email. Ava opened it. Her hands began trembling almost immediately. Attached to the email was a recent photograph. Dominic noticed the color leave her face. Ava? He asked. She slowly turned the screen toward him. The image showed Charles Whitmore standing outside a private hospital. Beside him stood a teenage boy who looked remarkably familiar. So familiar that even Dominic immediately noticed the resemblance. The boy had Lily's eyes. Dominic stared at the photograph for several moments before placing the phone back on the table. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The shape of the eyes, the expression, even the slight tilt of the head looked strikingly familiar. Ava lowered herself onto the couch and pressed both hands together, trying to steady her nerves. She had hoped this secret would remain buried forever. Instead, it seemed determined to find its way back into her life. Tell me what I am looking at, Dominic said gently. Ava closed her eyes. 7 years ago, after I left Ohio, I promised myself I would never speak about any of it again. I wanted Lily to have a normal life. I wanted her to grow up without carrying someone else's mistakes. Dominic listened without interrupting. The boy in that picture is named Ethan, Ava continued. He was only a baby when I left. I have not seen him since. Dominic frowned. And Charles Whitmore? Ava nodded. He raised Ethan as his grandson. Dominic immediately noticed something important. You said grandson. Ava looked at him. Because Ethan is not his son. A heavy silence settled between them. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows while the clock on the wall marked each passing second. Ava stood and walked toward the kitchen before returning with a glass of water she barely touched. Years ago, there was an accident on a snowy highway outside Columbus. Several families were affected. A newborn baby was separated from his mother during the confusion. Records were misplaced. Decisions were made too quickly. By the time the truth began to emerge, powerful people wanted the situation buried. Dominic's expression darkened. What does that have to do with Lily? Ava swallowed hard. Everything. She walked toward a small bookshelf and pulled out an old envelope. Inside were faded documents she had carried across multiple states and through countless moves. Dominic watched as she carefully removed a hospital bracelet and a folded letter. I kept these because one day I knew questions would come. She handed him the bracelet. The name written on it was not Lily Brooks. It was another name entirely. Dominic looked up. Ava's eyes were filled with emotion. The little girl sleeping upstairs was not born Lily Brooks. Dominic felt the pieces beginning to shift into place. What are you saying? Ava took a shaky breath. I am saying that 7 years ago, 2 infants left that hospital with the wrong families. Dominic stared at her in disbelief. You think Lily was switched at birth? Ava nodded slowly. Not think. No. The room became completely silent. Suddenly many things made sense. The message. The attorney. The photograph. The fear that had followed Ava all evening. If her secret was true, then Charles Whitmore had not returned because of money or revenge. He had returned because someone had finally uncovered the truth. Ava looked toward the staircase where Lily slept peacefully, unaware that her entire identity might change by morning. Then Ava opened the letter that had remained hidden for 7 years and revealed the first line written across the top. It was a recent DNA report confirming that Lily Brooks was not biologically related to Ava at all. Dominic read the DNA report twice before setting it down. The words did not change. The conclusion remained the same. The child Ava had raised, loved, protected, and sacrificed for was not biologically hers. Yet as Dominic looked toward the staircase, he understood something that a laboratory report could never measure. Lily was still Ava's daughter in every way that mattered. Ava sat quietly across from him, exhausted from carrying the weight of this secret alone. When did you learn the truth? Dominic asked. Ava stared at the documents spread across the coffee table. 6 months ago. Dominic was surprised. Only 6 months? She nodded. I received an anonymous letter. At first I thought it was a cruel mistake. Then I started asking questions. I requested old records. I contacted people who had worked at the hospital. One answer led to another. She paused. Eventually I paid for the DNA test myself. Dominic remained silent. Ava looked toward the rain-covered window. Part of me hoped the test would prove everything was false. I wanted my life to stay exactly the way it was. Her voice softened. Instead, it confirmed my worst fear. Dominic understood why she had hidden the truth. Every parent fears losing a child. Ava faced something even more complicated. She feared that discovering the truth might somehow change the bond she shared with Lily. Why did you not tell anyone? Dominic asked. Ava laughed sadly. Who was I supposed to tell? The little girl upstairs calls me Mom every single day. I taught her how to ride a bicycle. I stayed awake through fevers. I helped with homework. I celebrated every birthday. Then one report arrives and suddenly the world says she belongs somewhere else. Dominic leaned forward. No report can erase 7 years of love. Ava's eyes filled with emotion. For a moment neither spoke. Then she picked up the photograph of Ethan. The investigation eventually led me to him, she said. According to the records, he is the child who may have been switched with Lily. Dominic studied the teenager's face again. Does he know? Ava shook her head. I do not think so. At least not until recently. She explained that Charles Whitmore's legal team had spent months conducting their own private investigation. They had uncovered enough evidence to suspect the truth. Now they wanted a meeting. Not next month. Not next week. Immediately. Dominic frowned. And that is why they contacted you tonight. Yes. Ava looked down at her hands. They want answers. They want access to Lily. They probably want to discuss Ethan too. The thought made her visibly uncomfortable. Suddenly another notification appeared on her phone. This time it was a calendar invitation. Ava opened it cautiously. Her heart immediately began racing. The meeting had already been scheduled. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. At Whitmore Memorial Hospital. Dominic read the details over her shoulder. Then both of them noticed the final sentence written at the bottom of the invitation. Please bring Lily Brooks. Ethan Whitmore will also be present. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Ava barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the meeting waiting for them in the morning. She imagined Lily asking questions she could not answer. She imagined Ethan standing on the other side of the room, unaware that his life might be connected to hers in ways neither of them understood. Shortly after sunrise, Ava prepared breakfast while trying to appear calm. Lily happily chatted about a school project and never noticed the tension on her mother's face. Dominic had left only a few hours earlier, but true to his word, he returned just after 8 o'clock. When Ava opened the door, she immediately felt a small sense of relief. Dominic's presence had a way of making difficult situations feel manageable. During the drive to the hospital, Lily sat quietly in the back seat, holding a stuffed rabbit she had loved since preschool. Ava looked out the window and watched the city pass by. The closer they came to the hospital, the tighter her chest felt. By 9 o'clock, they were walking through the main entrance of Whitmore Memorial Hospital. A receptionist greeted them and directed them to a private conference room on the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, Ava's hands began trembling again. Dominic noticed and gently squeezed her shoulder. "Whatever happens in there, you are not facing it alone," he said. Ava nodded. Those words helped more than he realized. Inside the conference room, several people were already waiting. 2 attorneys sat near the far end of the table. A woman in a white coat introduced herself as a genetic specialist who had reviewed the evidence. Then Ava saw Charles Whitmore standing near the window. He looked older than the man in the photograph, but his presence remained commanding. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Charles stepped forward. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Ava expected arrogance. Instead, she heard regret. Before she could respond, the conference room door opened again. A teenage boy entered carrying a backpack. He looked confused about why he had been called there. The moment Ava saw him in person, her breath caught. The resemblance between him and Lily was even stronger than it had appeared in the photograph. Ethan stopped walking when he noticed everyone staring. "What is going on?" he asked. No one answered immediately. The genetic specialist placed several folders on the table and began explaining years of records, investigations, and DNA testing. Every detail pointed toward the same conclusion. A hospital error had changed 2 families forever. Ethan listened silently. Lily looked up at Ava with growing confusion. "Mom," she whispered. Ava immediately knelt beside her chair and held her hand. "I am right here," she said. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan slowly looked toward Lily. For several moments, neither child spoke. Finally, Ethan smiled nervously and said, "You kind of look like me." The innocent comment broke the tension in the room. But before anyone could respond, Charles Whitmore opened a folder and revealed a document no one else had seen before. According to the report in front of him, there was a 3rd child connected to the original hospital investigation. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the newly revealed document. Even the attorneys appeared surprised. Charles Whitmore slowly sat down and adjusted his glasses before speaking. "We only discovered this information 3 days ago," he said. "Until then, we believed the situation involved only 2 children." The genetic specialist opened another folder and carefully spread several pages across the table. Ava felt her heart racing again. Every answer seemed to create 2 new questions. Dominic remained beside her, his calm presence helping her stay focused. Across the room, Ethan looked completely overwhelmed. Lily sat quietly next to Ava, holding her hand tightly. "What does this mean?" Ethan finally asked. The specialist took a deep breath. The original investigation uncovered inconsistencies in multiple hospital records from the same week. Additional testing revealed that another infant may have been affected by the same administrative errors. Ava stared at the paperwork. "Another child?" The specialist nodded. "Yes." Charles looked down at the table. The hospital experienced a system failure during a severe winter storm. Several records were manually entered afterward. Unfortunately, mistakes were made. Ethan leaned back in his chair. So there is another family going through this too? Possibly, the specialist answered. We are still confirming everything. Ava could barely process the information. For months she had struggled to accept the possibility that Lily had been switched at birth. Now she was learning that the situation might be far larger than anyone imagined. Dominic noticed her expression. You do not need to solve everything today, he said quietly. Ava nodded but remained distracted. Charles then surprised everyone by turning directly toward her. I owe you an apology. The room became still. Ava blinked. She had expected legal discussions, arguments, maybe even demands. She had not expected an apology. Charles continued. Years ago, when concerns first surfaced, I trusted the wrong people. I accepted explanations without asking enough questions. If I had pushed harder then, perhaps none of us would be sitting here today. Ava studied him carefully. For the first time, she saw genuine regret rather than authority. Before she could respond, Ethan suddenly stood and walked toward Lily. The adults watched nervously. Ethan knelt so he could speak at her eye level. You seem scared, he said softly. Lily nodded. A little. Ethan smiled. Me too. That simple honesty immediately eased some of the tension. Lily managed a small smile in return. Ava felt tears forming in her eyes. In that moment, she realized something important. None of the children had done anything wrong. They were simply trying to understand a truth that adults had hidden from them for years. Then one of the attorneys received a phone call. His expression changed instantly. After ending the call, he looked toward Charles. The third family has been located, he said. The room became silent once again. They agreed to share preliminary records. Charles stood slowly. Do we know the child's name? The attorney looked down at the report before answering. Ava felt her stomach tighten. Something about his expression told her this revelation would change everything once again. Finally, he spoke. The third child is not a child anymore. She is 24 years old. And according to these records, she has been working at Russo Enterprises for the past 2 years. For a moment, nobody spoke. The attorney's words seemed impossible to process. Dominic was the first to react. Someone from my company? He asked. The attorney nodded. According to the preliminary records, yes. Charles Whitmore requested a copy of the report and began reviewing the details. Ava watched Dominic carefully. His expression remained calm, but she could tell his mind was racing. Russo Enterprises employed thousands of people across multiple divisions. The possibility that another person connected to this decades-old mistake had somehow entered his organization felt almost unbelievable. Ethan returned to his seat while Lily quietly colored on a piece of paper the receptionist had given her earlier. Neither child fully understood the significance of what was unfolding. The adults, however, understood that every new discovery seemed to connect their lives more deeply. After several minutes, the attorney finally revealed the employee's name. Dominic immediately recognized it. Sophia Bennett, he said. Ava looked at him. You know her? Dominic nodded. She works in our accounting department. She has been with the company for 2 years. The specialist leaned forward. Based on what we have uncovered so far, Sophia may have been linked to the same hospital incident. We are still verifying details, but the evidence appears strong. Charles slowly closed the folder. This situation is far larger than any of us imagined. Ava could only agree. Less than 24 hours earlier, she believed she was carrying a private burden that affected only herself and Lily. Now multiple families, multiple lives, and decades of unanswered questions seemed connected. Dominic stood and walked toward the window. The city stretched below them beneath a cloudy afternoon sky. After a moment, he turned back toward the room. Whatever happened years ago, none of these people should face it alone. Ava noticed Ethan listening carefully. The teenager looked exhausted. His entire identity had been challenged in a single morning. Yet instead of anger, he seemed more concerned about Lily. "Will we see each other again?" he suddenly asked. Lily looked up from her drawing. "I guess so." Ethan smiled. "Good." The simple exchange warmed Ava's heart. She realized that while adults often complicated everything, children sometimes accepted reality with remarkable grace. As the meeting continued, the specialists outlined the next steps. More records would be reviewed. Additional interviews would take place. Families would be given time to process the information before any major decisions were made. No one would be pressured into immediate changes. Hearing that brought visible relief to Ava. Then Charles surprised everyone once again. He approached Ava directly. "Regardless of biology, nobody can replace the years you spent raising Lily," he said. "Whatever happens next, I hope you remember that." Ava felt emotion rising in her chest. For the first time since receiving the anonymous letter months earlier, she felt seen rather than judged. The meeting finally ended in the late afternoon. People gathered their documents and prepared to leave. Dominic offered to drive Ava and Lily home. As they walked toward the elevator, the attorney hurried after them. "Miss Brooks," he called. Ava turned around. The attorney handed her a sealed envelope that had arrived only minutes earlier. "This was delivered for you." Ava examined the envelope. There was no return address. Only her name appeared on the front. Curious, she opened it immediately. Inside was a single photograph. The moment she saw the image, she stopped walking. Dominic looked over her shoulder and felt his own surprise. The photograph showed Ava as a baby in the arms of a woman neither of them recognized. Written across the back were 6 words that changed everything once again. "She was never your mother." The drive home felt strangely quiet. Ava sat in the passenger seat holding the photograph while Lily slept peacefully in the back seat. Dominic kept his eyes on the road, but his thoughts were clearly racing. Every answer they had uncovered during the past 24 hours had opened the door to another mystery. By the time they arrived at Ava's apartment, evening had settled over the city. After helping Lily upstairs, Ava returned to the living room and placed the photograph on the table. Dominic examined it again. The woman holding baby Ava appeared warm and happy. Nothing about the image explained the message written on the back. "Who sent it?" Dominic asked. Ava shook her head. "I have no idea." 2 days later, another envelope arrived. This time it contained copies of adoption records and a handwritten letter. Ava spent hours reading every page. Slowly, the final pieces began falling into place. The woman who raised her had loved her deeply, but she had never been her biological mother. Years earlier, after a family tragedy, Ava had been quietly adopted through a legal arrangement that remained hidden from almost everyone. The woman who raised her had protected that secret her entire life because she feared losing her. When Ava finished reading the letter, tears filled her eyes. For years she had wondered whether discovering the truth would make her feel disconnected from the woman she called Mom. Instead, she felt the opposite. Every sacrifice, every late-night conversation, every act of love suddenly carried even greater meaning. A few weeks later, the investigations surrounding Lily and Ethan reached their conclusion. The records confirmed what everyone now suspected. Mistakes had been made many years ago, but the families involved agreed on one thing. Love mattered more than paperwork. Lily would remain with Ava. Ethan would remain with the family that had raised him. Both children would be free to build relationships with everyone connected to their past without losing the people who had always been there for them. The decision brought relief to everyone involved. As months passed, something unexpected happened. Ethan and Lily became friends. They exchanged messages, shared stories, and slowly learned about the unusual connection that had brought them together. Even Charles Whitmore changed. He stayed involved, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely cared about the people affected by the truth. One afternoon nearly a year after the first text message changed everything, Ava stood beside Dominic overlooking the city from a balcony at Russo Enterprises. Life had become calmer. The secrets were gone. The questions had answers. Dominic reached into his pocket and pulled out a small frame. Ava immediately recognized it. Inside was a screenshot of a text message. 3 simple words. I need you now. Ava laughed in disbelief. You kept it? Dominic smiled. Of course. That message created chaos. No, he replied softly. That message brought me to the right door. Ava looked at him, remembering the fear, confusion, and uncertainty she had felt that night. Dominic gently placed the framed message in her hands. You once thought sending those words was a mistake, he said. I think it was the best thing that ever happened to both of us. Then, as the sun began setting beyond the skyline, Dominic took her hand and asked her to spend the rest of her life with him. Ava smiled through tears and said yes. And for the first time in many years, every piece of her story finally felt exactly where it belonged.